It was a chilly autumn evening in Boston when Dr. Marcus Thompson finished his exhausting 12-hour shift at Metro General Hospital. The emergency room had been particularly busy that day, with multiple trauma cases requiring his expertise. As he gathered his belongings from his locker, his colleague Dr. Sarah Chen noticed the fatigue in his eyes. "Another tough day, Marcus?" she asked, concerned about her friend's worn expression. "Just the usual," he replied with a tired smile, sipping on his navy blue jacket. 3 car accident victims, 2 gunshot wounds, and countless other emergencies. But we saved them all. At 35, Dr. Thompson had already earned a reputation as one of the most skilled emergency physicians in the hospital. His steady hands and quick thinking had saved countless lives, but few knew about his past. The simple white coat he wore concealed years of military service and combat experience that had shaped him into the man he was today. Walking through the hospital corridors, he exchanged friendly nods with nurses and staff members who respected him deeply. Many patients had commented on his gentle bedside manner and the way he could calm even the most panicked individuals with his composed demeanor. As he stepped out into the crisp evening air, Marcus checked his watch. 9:45 p.m. The streets were quieter than usual, with only a few cars passing by. The autumn leaves crunched under his feet as he began his usual 15-minute walk home. He preferred walking to driving, using this time to clear his mind after intense hospital shifts. His thoughts drifted to his military days, specifically his time as a combat medic with the Special Forces. 7 years of service, 3 tours of duty, and countless operations had taught him skills that went far beyond medical expertise. The discipline, situational awareness, and combat training had become second nature to him. Marcus passed by the local diner where he occasionally grabbed breakfast. The owner, Mrs. Patterson, was closing up for the night and waved at him through the window. He waved back, remembering how she always insisted on giving him extra bacon because doctors need their strength. The streetlights cast long shadows as he turned onto Maple Street, still 4 blocks away from his apartment. He noticed a group of men hanging around the corner store, their loud voices carrying through the quiet night. Something about their body language made his combat-trained instincts tingle, but he maintained his pace, keeping his awareness heightened. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a message from his sister Lisa. "Don't forget Mom's birthday dinner tomorrow." He smiled, thinking about how his mother still treated him like her little boy, despite his achievements. She had been so proud when he completed both his military service and medical school, always telling everyone about her son, the doctor who served his country. As Marcus walked past the corner store, he could feel the men's eyes following him. Their conversations dropped to whispers, and he heard footsteps beginning to fall in line behind him. His military training immediately kicked in, assessing possible routes and scanning for potential threats or escape paths. The cool night air suddenly felt heavier as he recognized the telltale signs of an impending confrontation. He had seen similar situations during his service, and later in the emergency room, the calm before the storm. His hands remained relaxed at his sides, but his mind was already running through various scenarios. A quick glance at a store window's reflection showed 5 men following him, their faces marked with expressions that spoke of harmful intentions. Marcus noticed their distinct neo-Nazi tattoos and symbols, understanding immediately what was about to unfold. He continued walking, maintaining his composed exterior while his mind raced with tactical assessments. The combat medic in him was calculating distances, angles, and potential defensive positions, while the doctor in him was already thinking about possible injuries, both to himself and his potential attackers. The street ahead was empty, the nearby houses dark and quiet. Marcus knew the next few moments would test both aspects of his training, his ability to handle conflict and his oath to do no harm. As the footsteps behind him grew closer and the first racial slur was whispered loud enough for him to hear, Dr. Marcus Thompson, combat medic turned emergency physician, prepared himself for what was about to become a long night. The autumn wind picked up, scattering leaves across his path as the first heavy footsteps quickened behind him. The night was about to reveal that sometimes the most dangerous person in a confrontation might be the very one whose job it is to save lives. Hence, the footsteps behind Dr. Thompson grew louder as the group of men closed the distance. Their whispers had turned into clear voices, filled with hate and malice. The leader, a tall man with a shaved head and a spiderweb tattoo on his neck, called out first. "Hey boy, Ain't this a little too nice of a neighborhood for you? His voice carried a mix of mockery and threat. Marcus continued walking, his pace steady, his mind calculating. He counted the footsteps, 5 distinct patterns. His military training had taught him to gather information without appearing to do so. Through the reflections in store windows, he observed their positions. 2 on his left, 2 on his right, and the leader slightly behind. The group was getting bolder, encouraged by his silence. Another man, wearing a leather jacket with white supremacist patches, moved closer. "We're talking to you, Dr. Mann. We saw you coming out of that hospital." Marcus noticed how they had positioned themselves to cut off potential escape routes. They were organized, suggesting this wasn't their first time doing this. His combat experience told him these men were dangerous, but also predictable in their tactics. "Look at him, all dressed up playing doctor," sneered a third man, younger than the others, probably in his early 20s. "Bet those credentials are fake anyway." The street had become eerily quiet. The few cars that passed by slowed down but didn't stop. Marcus could see people in nearby houses quickly closing their curtains. He recognized this behavior from his time in combat zones, the bystander effect, where people witnessed trouble but feared getting involved. The leader suddenly stepped in front of Marcus, forcing him to stop. Up close, the man's face showed years of anger and hatred etched into every line. He stood several inches taller than Marcus, using his height to try to intimidate. "You know what we do to people like you who don't know their place," the leader growled, his breath smelling of cheap beer and cigarettes. Marcus finally spoke, his voice calm and professional, the same tone he used with agitated patients in the ER. "Gentlemen, I'm just heading home after a long shift. I spent the last 12 hours saving lives, including people who probably share your views. We don't need to do this." His response seemed to surprise them momentarily. The clinical calmness in his voice didn't match their expectations. The leader recovered quickly, his face twisting into an ugly sneer. Well, educated too. That makes it worse, doesn't it, boys?" He looked around at his companions, who had now formed a tight circle around Marcus. One of them cracked his knuckles, a nervous habit Marcus had seen in many would-be fighters. Another pulled out a knife, trying to hide it behind his leg but failing to do so smoothly. Marcus noted these details automatically, his combat-trained mind assessing threats and planning responses. "Last chance," Marcus said, his voice still steady but carrying a hint of warning that only years of military service could instill. "I'm a doctor, yes, but that's not all I am. Walk away now, and we'll all go home safely." His words caused a ripple of laughter among the group. The leader stepped closer, invading Marcus's personal space. "You threatening us, boy? You really don't know who you're dealing with." A cold smile crossed the leader's face as he pulled out brass knuckles from his pocket. The metallic gleam caught the streetlight, a clear signal that things were about to turn violent. Marcus took a slow, deep breath. He could feel his combat training surging to the surface, mixing with his medical knowledge in a unique way. He knew exactly how much damage those brass knuckles could do. He treated enough victims in the ER. He also knew exactly how to disarm someone wielding them. The younger gang member shifted nervously, perhaps sensing something in Marcus's stance that the others missed. But it was too late for second thoughts. The leader had committed them to this path. As the first punch was thrown, time seemed to slow down for Marcus. In that split second, Dr. Thompson, the gentle emergency room physician, stepped aside, allowing Staff Sergeant Thompson, the battle-hardened combat medic, to take control. The real fight was about to begin, and these men were about to learn a harsh lesson about judging people by their appearance. The leader's brass knuckles cut through empty air as Marcus smoothly sidestepped the attack. Years of combat training took over, his body moving with practiced precision. Before anyone could react, Marcus grabbed the leader's extended arm, using the man's own momentum to send him stumbling into 2 of his companions. "What the hell?" one of them shouted, surprised by their leader's sudden loss of balance. The knife wielder lunged forward, blade glinting in the streetlight. Marcus's response was automatic, a quick deflection followed by a precise strike to the wrist. The knife clattered to the ground as its owner howled in pain. Marcus had hit a pressure point, temporarily paralyzing the man's hand without causing permanent damage. "He's trained," the youngest member warned, backing away slightly, but the others were already moving in. 2 attackers came at him simultaneously. Marcus recognized the street fighting style, unpolished but dangerous. The first threw a wild haymaker while the second aimed a kick at his knee. In one fluid motion, Marcus blocked the kick and redirected the punch, causing the attackers to collide with each other. The leader had recovered now, rage distorting his features. "Get him!" he roared, charging forward with the brass knuckles again. Marcus's combat medic experience flashed through his mind. He knew exactly where to strike to incapacitate without killing. His elbow found the leader's solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs. As the man doubled over, Marcus swept his legs, sending him crashing to the pavement. The remaining attackers hesitated, shocked by how quickly their advantage had disappeared. They had expected an easy target, not this efficient fighting machine. The young one turned to run, but his companions grabbed him, forcing him to stay. "He's making us look bad," the knife wielder snarled, having regained some feeling in his hand. "Rush him all at once." They came at him like a wave, but Marcus had faced worse in combat zones. He moved like water, each defensive move flowing into a counterattack. His strikes were precise, targeting pressure points and nerve clusters that would cause pain without permanent injury. The doctor in him was still in control, even as the warrior fought. One attacker caught a glancing blow to Marcus's ribs, but the pain only sharpened his focus. He responded with a combination learned in Special Forces training, a palm strike to the chest, followed by a sweep that sent the man sprawling. The leader, still gasping for breath, pulled something from his jacket, a small revolver. "Stay still, you son of a..." Marcus moved before the sentence was finished. His hand clamped down on the gun, fingers precisely targeting nerve points in the leader's wrist. The weapon fell from nerveless fingers as the leader screamed in pain. "I've treated gunshot wounds for 7 years in combat zones," Marcus said calmly, securing the weapon. "I won't let you create another one here." The fight had lasted less than 2 minutes. 4 of the attackers were on the ground, moaning in pain but conscious. The youngest stood frozen, staring at Marcus with a mixture of fear and awe. Distant sirens pierced the night. Someone had called the police. Marcus quickly assessed his opponent's injuries with a medical eye. Despite their intentions, his doctor's instincts kicked in as he noticed the leader clutching his chest, breathing irregularly. "You may have bruised ribs," he said professionally, kneeling beside the man who had just tried to shoot him. "Try to take shallow breaths. The pain will be intense but shouldn't last too long." The leader stared up at him, confusion replacing hatred in his eyes. Why are you helping me?" "Because I took an oath," Marcus replied, checking the man's pulse. "As a doctor and as a soldier, to protect and to heal, even those who might wish me harm." The police cars were getting closer now, their lights painting the street in flashing red and blue. Marcus stood up, his posture relaxed but alert. The night's excitement was far from over, but the worst of the danger had passed. The young gang member, still standing, looked at Marcus with newfound respect. What are you?" Marcus smiled slightly. "Just a doctor who learned a few extra skills along the way." Police sirens wailed closer as 3 patrol cars pulled up to the scene, their lights bathing the street in alternating red and blue. Officers emerged with weapons drawn, responding to reports of a fight and a possible gunshot. "Hands where we can see them," shouted the first officer, taking in the unusual scene. 5 men on the ground, and 1 well-dressed man standing calmly in their midst. Marcus raised his hand slowly, speaking in his clear, professional voice. "I'm Dr. Marcus Thompson from Metro General Hospital. These men attacked me, and I defended myself. 1 has a concealed weapon I've secured, and several need medical attention." Officer Sarah Rodriguez, a veteran cop who regularly brought patients to Marcus's ER, recognized him immediately. "Dr. Thompson, lower your weapons," she commanded her colleagues. "I know this man. He's one of our best emergency physicians." The other officers lowered their guns but maintained their vigilance as they began securing the scene. Rodriguez approached Marcus, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "Want to tell me what happened here, Doc?" As Marcus explained the situation, paramedics arrived to assess the injured attackers. The leader was still struggling to breathe, clutching his chest. Despite everything, Marcus moved to assist the paramedics. "Possible fractured ribs on this one," he explained professionally, helping them stabilize the man who had tried to kill them minutes earlier. The others have various soft tissue injuries, nothing life-threatening. This one, he pointed to the knife wielder, may need x-rays for his wrist. The young gang member, who hadn't fled, was being questioned by police. They found neo-Nazi propaganda materials in his pocket, confirming the hate crime nature of the attack. The boy's hands were shaking as he spoke. We didn't know he was military," the young man stammered. Jake said he'd be an easy target, coming home from the hospital all tired. Officer Rodriguez shook her head in disgust as she collected the illegal weapon Marcus had confiscated. "You picked the wrong person to attack. Dr. Thompson here not only saves lives at our hospital but served 3 tours as a combat medic. You're lucky he showed restraint." More police cars arrived, along with news vans attracted by the police radio chatter. Marcus noticed Mrs. Patterson from the diner among the gathering crowd, her hand over her mouth in shock as she recognized him. Detective James Chen, head of the Hate Crimes Unit, arrived on scene and pulled Marcus aside for a statement. "Dr. Thompson, we've been tracking this group for months. They've attacked several minorities in the area, but most victims were too afraid to press charges." Marcus nodded, watching as the paramedics loaded the leader into an ambulance. "I'll press charges, Detective. Not for revenge, but because they need to be stopped before they hurt someone who can't defend themselves." The young gang member overheard this and looked down in shame. Tears were forming in his eyes as the reality of his actions began to sink in. Marcus noticed this and approached him, still under police supervision. "What's your name?" Marcus asked quietly. Tommy Mitchell," the boy replied, unable to meet his eyes. "Tommy, you're young enough to change your path," Marcus said, his voice carrying the same compassion he used with scared patients. "I've seen too many young men die senselessly, both in war and in my ER. Don't let hate write the story of your life." Officer Rodriguez was collecting evidence, including brass knuckles and neo-Nazi literature. She paused to observe Marcus talking to the young man, amazed at his ability to show kindness even after such a violent encounter. As the scene cleared and statements were taken, news reporters tried to get comments from Marcus. He politely declined, preferring to let the police handle the public aspects of the case. Detective Chen approached one final time. "Dr. Thompson, we'll need you to come to the station tomorrow to formalize your statement. And thank you. Your actions tonight might help us shut down this entire hate group." Marcus nodded, fatigue finally settling into his bones as the adrenaline wore off. The night had turned out far differently than he'd expected, but perhaps some good would come from it. As he watched the police cars drive away with the arrested men, he couldn't help but hope that at least Tommy would find a better path forward. The streets were quiet again, but something had changed. The darkness that had bred hatred had been confronted by someone who chose to fight with skill and mercy, showing that true strength lies not in causing harm, but in knowing when and how to show restraint. The following morning, Metro General Hospital was buzzing with news of Dr. Thompson's encounter. Despite his attempts to keep the incident quiet, cell phone footage of the aftermath had already spread through social media. As Marcus walked through the hospital entrance for his shift, he noticed the changed way people looked at him, a mixture of awe, respect, and curiosity. "Dr. Thompson," Nurse Jenny Martinez called out as he entered the ER. "Are you sure you should be working today, after what happened?" Marcus offered a reassuring smile. "I'm fine, Jenny. We have patients who need us." He headed to the locker room to change into his scrubs, trying to maintain his normal routine despite the extraordinary circumstances. Dr. Chen caught up with him in the hallway. "Marcus, have you seen the morning news? They're calling you the Guardian Doctor. The footage of you treating those men after they attacked you. It's gone viral." Before Marcus could respond, his pager buzzed. Emergency trauma arriving. Multiple gunshot wounds. He rushed to the ER entrance, grateful for the distraction from his sudden unwanted fame. The ambulance doors burst open, revealing a familiar face on the stretcher. Jake Miller, the neo-Nazi gang leader from the previous night. He had been shot in what appeared to be gang retaliation for his arrest. GSW to the chest and abdomen, the paramedic reported. BP dropping, pulse irregular. Without hesitation, Marcus took charge. "Get him to Trauma 1, stat. I need a chest tube tray and blood, type O negative." The injured man's eyes widened with recognition as Marcus began working to save his life. You, why are you helping me? He gasped through the oxygen mask. Because that's what doctors do, Marcus replied calmly, his hands steady as he worked. We treat everyone, regardless of who they are or what they believe. Hours passed in intense surgery. Marcus worked tirelessly, his military medical experience proving invaluable as he extracted bullets and repaired damaged tissue. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the operating room. The same man who had defended himself against this patient was now fighting to save his life. Meanwhile, in the waiting room, local news crews had gathered, drawn by the dramatic turn of events. Hospital security kept them at bay while Marcus focused on his patient. Finally, after 4 hours of surgery, Marcus emerged from the operating room, exhausted but successful. Jake would live, though his recovery would be long. As he was updating the charts, Tommy Mitchell, the young gang member from the night before, appeared at the nurse's station, accompanied by a police officer. He had been released to his mother's custody and had come to check on his former leader. Dr. Thompson, Tommy said hesitantly, I heard what you did for Jake. After everything. I don't understand. Marcus gestured for Tommy to follow him to a quieter corner. In combat, I treated enemy soldiers who minutes before had been trying to kill my teammates. In this hospital, I treat criminals alongside victims. Medicine isn't about judgment, it's about healing. Tommy's mother, standing nearby, wiped tears from her eyes. Doctor, my boy told me everything. About last night, about what you said to him. He's agreed to enter a rehabilitation program for former gang members. The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Chen rushing over. Marcus, you need to see this. She held up her phone, showing a live news broadcast. The story had expanded beyond the previous night's attack. Reporters had uncovered Marcus's military record, including incidents where he had saved enemy combatants under fire. The headline read, Combat Medic turned ER Doctor shows true meaning of do no harm. Marcus sighed, uncomfortable with the attention but recognizing the potential impact of the story. His actions were challenging people's preconceptions about violence, revenge, and the capacity for compassion. A text message buzzed on his phone. Detective Chen from the Hate Crimes Unit. 4 more victims came forward after seeing your story. We're building a solid case. Your actions may have ended years of violence in our community. Marcus pocketed his phone and turned back to Tommy and his mother. There was more work to be done, more lives to save, and perhaps more minds to change. The ripple effects of that one violent night were spreading, carrying an unexpected message of humanity and hope. Now, he said, checking his watch, I have patients to see. Tommy, make the most of your second chance. A week had passed since the incident, and Marcus sat in his office reviewing patient files. Among them was Jake Miller's chart, showing steady improvement despite the severity of his injuries. The gang leader had been unusually quiet during his recovery, spending long hours staring at the ceiling of his hospital room, guarded by a police officer. A knock on the door interrupted Marcus's work. Detective Chen entered, carrying a thick folder. Dr. Thompson, we need to talk, she said, taking a seat. Jake Miller wants to speak with you. He's been asking for 3 days now. Given the circumstances, we wanted your permission first. Marcus closed the patient file he'd been reviewing. What's his state of mind? Changed, Chen replied. The shooting that brought him here. It wasn't random retaliation like we first thought. It was his own second in command. The group's falling apart, and Jake claims he has information about other attacks we don't know about. Marcus stood up, straightening his white coat. Let's go see him. Walking through the hospital corridors, they passed the wall of local news clippings. The latest headline read, Former neo-Nazi youth enters rehabilitation program, credits ER doctor's influence. Tommy Mitchell's story had inspired others to leave hate groups, creating an unexpected domino effect. In Jake's room, the once intimidating leader looked diminished against the white hospital sheets. His Nazi tattoos stood out starkly against his pale skin, but his eyes had lost their previous hatred. Doctor, Jake said hoarsely as Marcus entered. I've been thinking about what you did. Both times, when you could really hurt us, and when you saved my life. Marcus checked Jake's vital signs while listening. The police officer in the room moved closer, alert but unobtrusive. My own people tried to kill me, Jake continued. But you, You saved me. A black doctor saved me after I tried to kill him. Do you know how much that messes with everything I believed? Marcus pulled up a chair. Hatred is a learned behavior, Jake. It can be unlearned. Jake's hands trembled as he pulled back his hospital gown to reveal his chest. Among his neo-Nazi tattoos was a fresh scar from the surgery Marcus had performed. This scar, your work, it's right through a swastika I had tattooed there. Feels like some kind of sign, doesn't it? Detective Chen stepped forward. Jake has offered to testify against the entire network, Dr. Thompson. His information could help us prevent dozens of planned attacks. Marcus noticed tears forming in Jake's eyes, something he never expected to see from the man who had threatened him with brass knuckles and a gun. I want to make things right, Jake said. Starting with this, he handed Marcus a folded piece of paper, a list of names. These are all the people our group attacked over the past year. Most were too scared to report it. They deserve justice, and the truth needs to come out. The moment was interrupted by a commotion outside. Several nurses were gathered around a TV in the hallway. A breaking news report showed police raids happening across the city, taking down various hate group hideouts. The investigation sparked by Marcus's incident had grown into a major operation. Your actions that night, Detective Chen explained, created a cascade effect we couldn't have predicted. Tommy's rehabilitation program has 20 new members now, all former gang members looking to change. Marcus reviewed Jake's surgical site one last time before heading to the door. The body can heal from almost anything with proper care, he said. The same is true for the mind and heart. But like physical therapy, the road to recovery takes work and commitment. Jake nodded, his expression serious. I understand, doctor. And I'm sorry. For everything. As Marcus left the room, he passed the hospital chapel where Tommy Mitchell's mother was organizing a support group for families of former gang members. The sight reminded him of his combat days, how healing often extended beyond physical wounds. His phone buzzed, a message from the hospital board. They wanted him to head a new program combining medical care with community outreach, focusing on breaking cycles of violence. The incident that could have ended in tragedy was instead sparking lasting change. Walking back to his office, Marcus reflected on how sometimes the greatest victories come not from winning fights, but from transforming enemies into allies in the battle against hatred itself. 1 month after the incident, Metro General Hospital's largest conference room was packed to capacity. Dr. Marcus Thompson stood at the podium, surrounded by an unlikely mix of people, medical staff, former gang members, community leaders, and law enforcement officials. Today marks the launch of our new community healing initiative, Marcus began, his voice carrying the same calm authority that had faced down violence that fateful night. This program will combine medical care with social support to address both the physical and emotional wounds in our community. In the front row sat Tommy Mitchell, now clean-cut and wearing a volunteer badge. Next to him was his mother, beaming with pride. Behind them, Jake Miller sat in a wheelchair, still recovering but determined to attend. His neo-Nazi tattoos were now covered by long sleeves, and he was taking notes, preparing for his role as a speaker to youth groups about the dangers of hate organizations. Violence, Marcus continued, is like a disease. It spreads through contact, grows in darkness, and can be passed from generation to generation. But like any disease, it can be treated if we understand its causes and work together to heal. Detective Chen, sitting with other police officials, nodded in agreement. The investigation sparked by the attack had led to the dissolution of 3 major hate groups in the city. More importantly, it had created a bridge between law enforcement and communities that had previously distrusted them. Our program will offer medical care to anyone who needs it, Marcus explained, but we'll also provide counseling, job training, and support for those looking to leave violent organizations. The hospital board has committed full funding for the next 5 years. As he spoke, nurses distributed brochures showing the program's various components. Dr. Sarah Chen had helped design the medical aspects, while Tommy's mother contributed her experience in family support services. Even Mrs. Patterson from the diner had gotten involved, offering job training in her restaurant. Jake raised his hand during the question period. Dr. Thompson, how can those of us who caused harm make genuine amends? Marcus considered the question carefully. by using your experiences to prevent others from following the same path. Your testimonies are powerful tools for change. After the presentation, Marcus found himself surrounded by reporters. Instead of focusing on the dramatic events of the attack, they were now interested in the broader implications of the program. Dr. Thompson, one journalist asked, "What inspired you to turn a violent incident into a community healing initiative?" In combat, Marcus replied, "I learned that treating injuries wasn't enough. You had to address the conditions that caused the conflict. The same principle applies here." Later that afternoon, Marcus visited the hospital's new community center, where Tommy was helping set up for the first support group meeting. The walls were decorated with artwork created by former gang members, expressing their journeys away from hatred. "Dr. Thompson," Tommy called out, "we got 10 new registrations today. Former members wanting to change, just like me." Marcus helped him arrange chairs in a circle. "How's the college preparation going?" "Getting there," Tommy grinned. "Mom says she never thought she'd be helping me study for the SATs instead of bailing me out of jail." The day ended with a small ceremony in the ER, where a plaque was unveiled commemorating the program's launch. But for Marcus, the real victory was in the small changes he witnessed. Former enemies sitting together, planning community projects. Police officers and neighborhood residents sharing coffee and conversations. Families reuniting as the barriers of hatred crumbled. As he prepared to leave for the day, Marcus received a text from Detective Chen, "Just interviewed another former member. Says watching you treat Jake after the shooting made him question everything he believed about hate and humanity." Marcus smiled, remembering his military instructor's words. Sometimes the strongest weapon against hatred is unexpected kindness. In his office, he looked at the growing pile of letters from people impacted by the program. Each one represented a small victory in the larger battle against violence and prejudice. The attack meant to harm him had instead sparked a movement of healing that was spreading through the city. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new patients, and new opportunities to bridge divides. But for now, Marcus was content knowing that sometimes the best way to fight darkness was not with more darkness, but with persistent, unwavering light. 6 months after the attack, Metro General Hospital hosted a special graduation ceremony. The first class of the Community Healing Initiative was completing their program, and Dr. Marcus Thompson stood proudly watching the proceedings from the side of the stage. 20 former gang members, including Tommy Mitchell and Jake Miller, sat in their chairs wearing formal attire instead of gang colors. Their families filled the audience, many wiping tears of joy as they witnessed the transformation of their loved ones. "Today marks not just an ending, but a beginning," Marcus said as he took the podium. "Each person here has shown incredible courage in choosing to change, to heal, and to help others do the same." Jake Miller, now walking with a cane, was the first graduate called to receive this certificate. The scar from his surgery was hidden beneath his suit, but its impact remained visible in his changed demeanor. He had become one of the program's most effective speakers, visiting schools to share his story of transformation. "Dr. Thompson saved my life twice," Jake said during his speech. "Once with his surgical skills, and once by showing me that hatred is a choice we can unmake." Tommy Mitchell followed, standing tall as he accepted his certificate. He had been accepted to the local community college, planning to study social work. His mother's support group had grown to include families from across the city, creating a network of healing that extended far beyond the hospital walls. Detective Chen sat in the audience, accompanied by several other officers who had become regular volunteers in the program. The police department had adopted new training protocols based on the initiative's success, focusing on community healing alongside law enforcement. Mrs. Patterson from the diner had hired 3 program graduates, including one as her assistant manager. Her business had become a model for other local establishments, showing how second chances could benefit the entire community. During the reception, Marcus noticed a familiar face, the young man who had been carrying the knife that night. He was now working as a youth counselor, using his experience to reach troubled teens before they joined gangs. "Doctor," the young man said, approaching Marcus with his hand extended, "I never properly thanked you. That night could have ended so differently." Marcus shook his hand firmly. "The best thanks is seeing what you've done with your second chance." The hospital board had expanded the program to 3 other hospitals in the region, with Marcus training other doctors to implement similar initiatives. His combination of medical expertise and combat experience had proven uniquely suited to breaking cycles of violence. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Marcus found himself back in the ER where it all began. A new plaque hung on the wall, displaying the program's motto: Healing Bodies, Transforming Lives. Below it were photos of the graduates, their before and after images telling stories of remarkable change. Tommy approached him, now wearing a volunteer badge for the evening shift. "You know, Dr. Thompson, I've been thinking about medical school. Maybe become a doctor like you." Marcus smiled, remembering his own journey from combat medic to emergency physician. "The world needs healers, Tommy, in more ways than one." As if on cue, ambulance sirens wailed in the distance. Marcus prepared for another night of saving lives, but now with a deeper understanding of how physical healing could spark broader transformation. The graduation ceremony had made the local news, but the real story wasn't in the headlines. It was in the quiet moments of change. Former enemies becoming friends, families rebuilding trust, and communities learning to heal together. Detective Chen's final report on the original hate group showed that most members had either entered rehabilitation programs or left the organization. The ripple effects of that one violent night had created waves of positive change throughout the city. As Marcus donned his white coat for his shift, he reflected on how his military training and medical expertise had prepared him for a different kind of battle: the fight against hatred itself. The combat medic and the emergency physician had merged into something more: a healer of both bodies and beliefs. The ER doors opened, bringing new patients and new challenges. But now, instead of working alone, Marcus was surrounded by a community of healers, some wearing medical scrubs, others wearing their transformed lives as badges of honor. Together, they continued the endless work of mending bodies and changing hearts, one patient at a time.